Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Only Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. This is Chris Vanini, your host, and I'm joined by Austin Smith, co-managing editor of TheOnlyColors.com, who recently made a big move.
Yeah, that's right. I am no longer a resident of Lincoln Park, Chicago. I'm now a resident of Gold Coast, Chicago. So to like the 15 of you listening that are in the Chicago area that means anything to, that's where I'm at now. Living in a high rise for the first time, it's a bit different. Sharing the elevator and stuff, it's kind of wild.
It's just like moving from Detroit to Dallas.
Yeah. We were saying before the pod that I didn't really have any room to complain about my move when Chris had to pick up and go 18 hours in a car. Did you have any dogs with you at that time?
Yeah, we had to split them up. It was a whole it was a whole thing.
I have no room to complain about my 3-mile move.
Well, honestly, the dogs weren't even the issue. It was the cat because it was an all-day drive, so we had to put him in a dog crate with a litter box in there, and that took a longer than any of the dogs did. But how is it moving into moving up to a place like that and having to get your
It was kind of a nightmare. That
seems like a pain in the butt.
Oh, so we were quoted by our moving company. It's funny because I lived with a couple other guys, and I live with a roommate now, and one of the other guys who I previously lived with moved into the same building. So we had 3 rooms worth of stuff going into this new big apartment building, and the moving company quoted us 4 hours. We're like, yeah, we gave them a shot for shot. Like, this is what we've got. And they're like, yeah, 4 hours, fine, whatever. They didn't even get done with moving our stuff out of our old apartment for 4 hours. So we completely missed our move-in window to the new apartment and had to wait till 6 p.m. We were supposed to be done by noon. We had to wait until 6 p.m. to even start moving into the new place. Like, luckily we had movers that were able to leave it all in the truck, but it just made for such a long day. And so, again, didn't have to drive to Dallas, but it's like moving is one of those things you just want to have done like as soon as humanly possible. And it dragged on for like an extra 8 hours on Saturday. So as you're going to all be made aware, I missed the spring game. I have gone back and done a little bit of watching and obviously tons of reading on it. But yeah, it was an interesting Saturday.
Something I did learn though in the past week, those moving expenses, they can be taxed. You can put them on your taxes.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Yeah. It's going to come in very handy in the next week then.
Yeah, I'm getting a refund basically strictly because of that, which is insane to me because normally I end up having to pay more because I'm an independent contractor. But yeah, I found that out and I was like, oh, okay. And then
that's epic. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, I would look into that next time.
Breakthroughs early here on the Only Podcast.
Yes, we give you your tax information on this podcast. This is what you listen for. But yeah, so basically what we're going to talk about here, the spring game as mentioned, and then a little bit of basketball. After this, there probably won't be a football podcast until something comes of the sexual assault investigation, and in basketball, maybe if Miles Bridges makes a decision. So kind of up in the air on what weeks we end up doing these things. But I figured after the spring game was definitely a time to do it, and we couldn't do it till later in the week because I had a bunch of stuff to do. And I'm actually covering the U.S. women's soccer game Thursday night here. So Wednesday, as we're recording this, is the best time to fit it in. So the spring game. Before we talk about the game itself and what went on, let's back up a week and a half or 2 weeks, I guess, to D'Antonio's press conference heading up to the spring game. He hadn't said anything other than one statement that came up. Since signing day, he hadn't said anything. Almost 2 months. He comes out, has a press conference, says he won't speak on anything football related because it's trivial, but also basically says he can't say much of anything about the investigation, which makes sense. So a lot of people questioned why even have it. I thought he handled it the way he should have. I thought he put a very serious tone behind what's going on, as he should, and just kind of put his face out there behind it a little bit more, which I said 2 weeks ago, I thought that was the press conference he should have had months ago. And just because the silence, not hiding, but the silence, public silence was not helping anything. I understood, why they did things as did. I assume lawyers were advising them to, but ahead of the spring game, he obviously felt he needed to say something. I thought he kind of handled it the way he should. It would. I think we'd even mentioned it on here that he could have come out and said, I'm not going to talk about this for now. Let's just talk about football. But I actually thought the way he handled it and said football's trivial, I don't really want to talk about that. I thought that was a good way of handling it. What did you think of that whole thing?
I agree with you in a vacuum. If you're strictly talking about this event, how he handled it, I don't think he could have done it any better. The fact that he, Coach D'Antonio didn't talk about football, really put things into perspective and said, this is obviously the priority. The football is trivial at this point. It's all everybody wanted to hear, and it's absolutely the truth. I think where people take issue is this is something that could have been done, like you said, 2-3 months ago. I think they clearly, to me, and I was tweeting about this at the time and had some good discussions with people, but they took a calculated risk when they decided not to come out and hold this press conference, whatever it was, 2-3 months ago. And the risk was that they thought this would be wrapped up. They thought this is, for better or worse, they thought this would be done by the time the spring game came around. And they wouldn't have to hold one of these State of the Union type of non-football related press conferences. And I think they were hoping that to avoid all of these strange things that came along with, these uncomfortable conversations, these, different circumstances that came up because it's not resolved. In a vacuum, like I said, I think the press conference in and of itself was handled about as well as you could have handled it. It could have been done earlier. I think, again, I kind of said all along that I didn't blame them for waiting because clearly they thought it was going to be wrapped up. But obviously, it's really bad optics when you're wrong with that gamble because now it looks like you're being secretive, which I don't think they're trying to be. I believe we have no reason to believe they're not being above board with everything. I guess that could prove to be untrue in the future, but for now, I don't think we have any reason not to trust them. But I think one of the weird things that it did, and really where it looks really unfair to a lot of kids, is there were 15 inactive kids.
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to get to next. So press conference, nothing came of it, but the most interesting part out of it was that he said, we're going to have everybody wear their numbers. And that was, everybody's like, so there's going to be a bunch of kids, listed on this that aren't involved in it. And I was surprised they went through with it as they did. And they did. So what did you think, before getting to, again, the football, what did you think of the decision to do that? And maybe what D'Antonio said afterward?
I don't really know what choice you have. I think this is all part of that gamble that they made the day they didn't come out and do this right off the bat. I think the optics were going to be bad no matter what they did. I think if you really had two options at that point, you could, when it comes down to like, okay, clearly this isn't going to be resolved. They know that for a fact. You have the press conference, and then you have to do one of two things. You either have to cancel this altogether, shut it off to the media for the first time in the D'Antonio era, I believe, not televise it, not do any of that stuff, and just send out, cryptic game notes, which would have looked terrible. That looks like you're hiding something. That looks like, that to me sends all the wrong messages. I think they're doing this in the spirit of transparency, but there's absolutely an unfair side effect that comes from that. And that is that of those 15 inactive kids, only 3 of them are involved theoretically in this investigation. And now, because you exposed everybody and you were so above board, you're giving everybody room to speculate. You're giving whether people are speculating or not, anyone who's followed this closely is going to see that list of 15 names and know, okay, it's one of these 3 kids. And now kids that are sitting out because, they're not up to their academic standards or they are injured or something, they're getting lumped in with 3 kids who are under investigation for sexual assault. That's not fair. That's not fair to those kids that are sitting out for other reasons, plain and simple. So yeah. I don't know how you – I don't know. I don't really know that there was a – I don't know that there's a correct way to handle it.
I mean, yeah, it really went from nothing to here's everybody and you guys figure out which ones are out. It was kind of swinging on both sides.
Yeah.
I don't think – had D'Antonio come up on I'm getting an echo off of your end. Do you have headphones at all?
Yeah, I have headphones in right now.
Oh, weird. Maybe it's just mine though. All right. Had D'Antonio come out Wednesday and said we're closing it off to the public because we don't want the wrong people to get lumped in, I don't think it would have been looked at as hiding, because I think it would have just been a continuation of how they handled it, and D'Antonio could have explained exactly why they were doing it. I think because the initial reaction to the press conference was, does he know what he's doing here? Does he realize what he's about to do? I don't think – I guess people say cancel. I guess my version of cancel is just close it off to the media and keep it like a regular scrimmage like you normally do, not get rid of it, because you only get 15 practices. So I had wondered if they were going to put people out in different numbers. Mm-hmm. That would look more like hiding
that
something.
Would be worse, I think.
That would be that. I was wondering if they do no numbers, but it'd be kind of the same deal. And then you look at the film afterward, and you kind of don't really have anything from it. So, yeah, it put
by deciding to push this off, by deciding to take that calculated risk that this is going to be wrapped up, they put themselves in this situation, and there's really no good way to handle it one way or the other. If you hide or whatever, if you shut it down to the media, it looks like it continues the already bad optics that you've got going on. But if you do it the way they did it, you expose these young men, at least until this is resolved. Now these 15 kids, you don't know which 3, but you know what I mean? It's really not fair to those kids. I do feel really bad for those guys, because anybody who has read anything, and I'm not going to name names because I've been against that from the jump. I haven't done it in columns. I haven't done it on Twitter, none of that stuff. So I'm not going to name names, but if you've read message boards, if you've followed this closely at all, you have an idea of who is involved in this. If you want to find that information, go find it. But, I don't know. It's one of those things, like, if you want to know, you're going to know. So I think that may be the way they're looking at it. I don't really know. I do think it's tremendously unfair to those kids, though.
Yeah, it's D'Antonio almost kind of seemed to think that the media wouldn't report who the 15 were.
Yeah, if that's true, that's all too naive for somebody who's been in this.
Based on what he said, right? Based on what he said, that's what it sounded like. But there's no way he really thought that. I mean, and
trying to put pressure on people.
I know the state news, I think, decided not to post the 15, which I think was. The LSJ did. A bunch of people did it. It's out there in the public. It's very easily public knowledge. I don't think not posting the 15 is any sort of, big journalism ethics thing. I think it's you had to do it because everybody else, it would have been out there. It's not, you're not the gatekeeper anymore.
There is no way to have a gatekeeper now with social media. It just doesn't exist.
Right, and so it is what it is. And now we've got a list of 15 kids, only 3 of whom are suspended for this case. We don't know when it's going to wrap up. We don't know what's going to happen. So I don't think there would have been a good way to handle it. I think, well, I'll take us into a next step. I think probably the best thing that they could have done was to close off the last scrimmage to the public and just say, we want to continue. We don't want to put any kids. We don't want to create any speculation about the kids, and that's a big reason we're doing it. I think I think kids maybe like local people who go to the game would be a little upset. You could still do the youth camp. I mean, really, beforehand, you can still do that. I don't know if the Big Ten sponsorships played into anything. I would hope not. So that's how I think they could have done it, but we're here with that. And that goes into what I was going to say next. After the game, I think Joe got real upset by a comment Antonio made that he basically said, the idea was kind of, you kind of got him. He said something like you got to kind of pick up and move forward a little bit. And Joe got real upset about that. I saw some other MSU fans who got real upset about it. I think out of context, I understand why the comments looked tone deaf, but I think in the context of the way they've handled all spring and the context of what he did at the press conference, it's very clear they're taking this very seriously between the criminal investigation, between the Title IX investigation, between I think the school or something has its own I believe there's 3 investigations going on. I think it's very clear that he has taken this very seriously. So I wasn't.
I think the tone.
I wasn't. I don't want to say offended, but I didn't take much issue with it. Just kind of because of that greater context. What did you think?
Yeah, I think the verbiage that upset Joe, if I understand it correctly, was that he said we owe it to our fans to move on and to move forward. And what Joe is saying is he doesn't owe me anything as a fan. He owes it to these kids to make sure he gets this situation right. Yeah. And I completely agree with that, but I also, I kind of tend to sway towards your side and say that it's really obvious that he's taking this very seriously. I don't know. I still trust him through all this. I know they've had their fair share. They've had a couple things happen here or throughout his 10 years, but for the most part, everything's been extremely above board and doesn't even compare to some of the other scandals that have gone on at other schools. I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt in a way. And I think he's just been extremely, when asked to speak, I think if you listen to his press conference, they're obviously taking this seriously. I don't know.
I think D'Antonio's gotten ripped in the past, especially from Iowa fans
and
of all people.
Deserved it sometimes.
About certain things that have gone on, whether it's Glenn Winston, whether it's Chris L. Rucker, I think playing after he got arrested for bumping into a cop car and that whole kind of weird situation. But for the most part, he's punished. He's given a couple people maybe too many second chances, or a couple people second chances who maybe didn't work out. But
every university has had their fair share of people get let off pretty easily. He's not the only one.
And the Rather Hall thing, every player from the Rather Hall fight that served jail time was off the team, like either quote transferred or was kicked off the team, other than Fred Smith, the receiver who got moved to fullback. And then I think he might have transferred later anyway. So he's had instances. I think that the Glenn Winston one obviously comes to mind, and that was early in his tenure. And I think he was asked about that recently. I don't remember. He said something about the way they handled it and why he gave him a second chance and stuff. And there's reason behind it. I don't think he's clearly in the situation not trying to pull a
he's had his successful disciplinary measures too. He took Delton Williams he allowed him to stay on the team, but he took his scholarship away from for a year after the aggravated or road rage incident when I think he flashed a gun.
And there's been instances with some of the recruits who have gotten in trouble, who they stuck with or didn't stick with, depending on what happened on later. They've had their share of troubled kids come into the program, but I'll also say that it's a weird competition between sports fans when they try to argue about arrests and player discipline and all that stuff. So I understand what Joe was saying. I think D'Antonio said the wrong. I think he said the wrong thing. It wasn't the right way to say it, but I understood what he meant in the context of his.
I think if you read it, it can come off as tone deaf for sure, because it looks like you're trying to sweep it under the rug, but that's clearly not what he means.
They're still a very large cloud over this program and over that game. It was kind of uncomfortable watching the game a little bit because you just knew what the bigger issue was, and certainly he knew that was the case, and they talked about it on BTN a little bit. So that's I guess my thoughts on where things are with that right now. We still have yet to find out, where things go from here.
Yeah, I mean, in the meantime, there is, it's funny because the guys on Rivals did a podcast the week before, and they were just like, it's time to talk about some football. Like, there is a lot going on, and we definitely need to address it. And I think here we've done our fair share of covering it and reporting on what's going on. But there is football to talk about as well. There was a spring game, and I know people do want to hear about that. Usually by now we've got a lot more news and developments and all that type of stuff.
Yeah. So I guess we can move into that now. I just hope it's been made clear through this podcast so far what is more important.
Yes,
in terms of what's going on. But they
100%.
They did play the game publicly. It's the first time we got to look at several players either for the first time or for the first time this spring, but some new guys in some new spots. MSU's got a lot of starting spots to fill. You didn't watch the game totally. You watched some of it. You read the stats. You read a lot on it. What are your kind of general thoughts coming out of it, or coming out of spring, I guess?
Well, basically, based on what I've been able to read and take away, and I did go back and watch some of the highlights of the game, but I think one of the things that's stepping out to me, that's popping out to me, is that a couple of guys are really at some key spots are emerging as, at a lot of those question mark spots where you would look at the team at the end of last year and think, like, what are they going to do at these certain places? I think a lot of these questions are being answered fairly early, or at least there are leaders in the clubhouse.
Yeah.
Like, quarterback Brian Lewerke it's pretty clear he's the guy. Now, Messiah DeWeaver and Terry didn't play due to injury, but the way D'Antonio talks about Lewerke when he talks about him is that he's sort of clearly the lead dog. And, he didn't have the greatest day. He had 2 picks, only 25 of 44 for 305 yards and a TD. But it looks like he's developed a really nice rapport with some of these guys, especially Tristan Jackson, who, this receiving core is in need of playmakers. They lost Medeiros, who was not even really all that effective in his tenure. But, you lost RJ Shelton, who was a big slot receiver for you. He played a ton in his 4 years. Tristan Jackson's kind of a similar type of player, drawn a lot of Keyshawn Martin comparisons, and he had 8 catches for 168 yards. It was good to see Cam Chambers have a nice day. Darrell Stewart had a decent day. And even Justin Lane, who everybody seems to think, for good reason, is going to start at corner, he had a nice day. He came in as a 4-star receiver, and he had 3 catches for 70 yards. So it's kind of cool to see these younger dudes stepping forward, especially on offense.
Yeah, and one thing about Lewerke, too, he is coming off the broken leg.
Right.
He was good. I believe he was good to go for spring, but, who knows if he's 100% and all that. He seemed to be still very, very poised. That was something, even last year, you always saw them. Even as a redshirt freshman, he never looked rattled. He made mistakes, but he always seemed to know what he was going to try to do. I think he's the guy. Some of the picks weren't great, but again, some of these are younger receivers. There could be different types of issues going on. What did you think of the format? I guess you didn't really watch it, but
yeah,
they did offense. They did offense versus defense. Kind of a weird scoring system. I don't really care about who won or lost, but I kind of liked it in this situation. D'Antonio basically said because of bodies we can't really split out, which is true, but it also, from a viewer standpoint, kind of helps you learn more about who guys could be where in first team and second team and all that. Because when you split them up, you don't really know. It's fun, but you can't really fully gauge guys. This was a better opportunity to gauge how guys could fit together. And it was 44 passes. Lewerke had a lot to do because the only guy behind him was walk-on Collar Coons. I forgot how they.
You won't need to know that name.
You're not going to need to know that name, but I thought at times Lewerke's arm looked strong. At other times it didn't. He looked to be a little late on things. He is like I said, coming back from the leg injury, got a bunch of new receivers to work with. But I still think his potential is really good. His completion percentage was not great last year, but he just – you looked at him in there, and he just felt like he was ready for it. He never – like I said, he never looked like he was overmatched. He had good poise in the pocket. He wasn't panicking. I mean, he'd missed some guys down the field. He's got to work on his vision, and that's something Antonio's talked about a lot. Make sure you're finding the right guys that's open. But he wasn't panicky, and he does have more mobility than O'Connor. Maybe not as much as Terry and DeWeaver, but he's got pretty good mobility to get out on the pocket. And I still think he's just got a lot of potential. He's very confident. He's a very confident kid too. He's not afraid to throw deep balls at O'Connor. Sometimes felt like at times he's willing to take shots. He's got to work on the vision, but I still think his potential is just really, really good. And to not have him in those last few games after he got hurt against Michigan, I think
it's too bad.
Just a killer for his development.
Absolutely.
It set him back. Those would have been extremely valuable, I think, reps for him. But totally. It is what it is now. So I think he appears to still be the guy. And Tristan Jackson, he had a good day, but D'Antonio was pretty quick to say he's got to toughen up. So that's something to watch. Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty clear, and I think D'Antonio even said, you can write that quote down. It's kind of an Izzo type of comment, but he clearly likes the potential, but he also clearly wants to see a lot more from him and sending a message. And they got to rebuild the receiving core. And Donnie Corley was among the 15 out for the game. Who knows who knows? We don't know what's up with that. But the other guys, Chambers, Lane, even Darrell Stewart, a lot of young guys.
Hunter Rison too.
Oh yeah. I don't know what his.
I don't know what he really ended up with, but the fact that everything I've read out of spring and in the reports, the few reports that we've seen is that he's been pretty impressive, just in terms of his route running, and I think he's going to be another one of those kind of slot guys to start who might be able to move outside, but. The development of rapport, I think his enrolling early is going to really help him. Like you said, there's a ton of opportunity at these receiver positions. Yes, there was a mega class last year, but you're not going to play with just 4 receivers. You're going to need more bodies. People are going to get hurt. People are going to be ineffective. People are going to get tired. So Hunter Rison, I would be absolutely shocked if he redshirts. I think he's going to come in and play well right off the bat. And I want to say something really quick on Lewerke, and then we can move forward.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we said this last year, but when you were just describing him, and I hate to make this comparison in a lot of ways, but you just described sophomore Connor Cook.
Yep, when I was explaining it, I almost said the same thing, and it is kind of what it reminds me of.
It's true. I mean, it's true. The completion percentage is lower than you want it to be, but he's going to stand in there. I think Lewerke is probably going to be a little more prone to take off because Cook was a very effective runner, but I think Lewerke's a little bit better of an athlete in that regard. Mm-hmm. He may not have although he's got a pretty decent arm. It's the same thing with Cook. It's like he's got more than enough arm, but he might not have an electric arm.
Yeah.
And again, it's about finding the right guys. And what's exciting about Lewerke is he's going to step in, kind of at the same point that, he's going to have, if you can believe it, he'll have more experience than Connor Cook did when he stepped in as the starter, coming into his redshirt sophomore year. So and
the thing about that, the receivers he was thrown to that year, remember the beginning of that 2013 season, everybody was dropping balls left and right, just like what happened in 2012. And then the Iowa game happened, and it kind of
they all came to life.
So a big part of.
And they all made the NFL.
and a big part of Lewerke and the passing game in general, something to keep in mind, is going to be how the receivers work, because Andrew Maxwell was not good, but he had no chance in 2012 because the receivers could not get open, and the line wasn't great at blocking. So how a Tristan Jackson can beat press coverage is going to be a big factor. How these guys can get open, run the right routes. It all plays together, and they need to replace basically all of that. And that's probably going to cause some problems.
There'll be some uncomfortable
Early,
games for sure. There'll be stretches where they look like sophomores, and there'll be stretches where you think this has the potential to be a powerful offense sooner rather than later. But that's just what happens when you're dealing with a lot of young players. That's what's going to happen. So I would expect LJ Scott, who they said revealed he had shoulder surgery in the offseason. Hopefully it's pretty minor because I know he's been practicing, but he's going to shoulder a lot of that load, and it'll be up to the offensive line to create room for him, because if they don't and these receivers have off days, that offense is going to get ugly quick.
Well, I mean, what do you think about the running game? Gerald Holmes, it's weird to think that Gerald Holmes is a senior now.
I know.
And Madre Lunda is a junior, but Gerald Holmes at times looks real good and at times doesn't. But they're going to have a lot of guys to hand that ball to. My fear, and after last season, there's a lot of fear, is that Dave Warner is going to get carried away with the hot hand again and go away from. We've talked about that a lot.
So many times. I know, and I won't harp on it now because you'll hear about it a lot in the fall.
For 2 years, they give the ball to the hot hand, except they don't.
And LJ Scott, I mean, down the second half of last year, he had that 3-game stretch in the middle of the year where he had 19 total carries in 3 games. There was
also a stretch where they gave him the ball a ton.
Right.
But then there were points in there when they didn't get the ball, such as 4th down against Michigan and other situations. It's just, we've talked about that. It's confusing.
If you take the step back and you realize, he had 6. He averaged over almost 110 yards a game over the second half of the season. That to me signifies in a macro sense that, Dave Warner and the offense kind of realized, like, all right, this is our guy.
Yeah.
We need to ride him. I don't think, if he takes a step forward, like coming into his junior season, like he did going into his sophomore season, you're talking about one of not only definitely the most electric player on your offense, but one of the best players in the Big Ten. Frankly, he's one of the best weapons. He can catch the ball. If they fed him like he should be fed, he's going to go for 1,200 yards this year. He had almost 1,000 last year, despite having those long stretches of not getting the ball. My worry, again, is that they're going to see depth and they're going to use it just to use it instead of giving your best player on your offense the ball the amount of times that he should get it, especially considering his supporting cast being so young. I think I hate to say, but like they're not going to give him. It's not going to be a Javon Ringer season.
Well,
like,
that's what I was
need 400 touches or whatever it is, but which is not that much of an exaggeration, by the way. But he should be getting the ball. He should be touching the ball 20 plus times a game. There's really no reason he shouldn't be. So
it's not a Ringer or a Bell, but
no, but it's just
there are times there is depth to use, but it's about the times that you use that depth.
Use it when you're up 20.
Not right after a touchdown drive where Scott picked up 60 of the yards on the drive.
Right. Yeah.
Don't switch him that unless it's gassed, but don't. So the first, it was the Michigan game, I think. Was Scott the running back for he's the
first drive?
Let him down. He let him down for the touchdown. Was he the running back for the second drive?
No,
I do not
Gerald
remember.
Holmes was.
Okay, exactly. That's a situation where he shouldn't be that gassed. It was the first drive of the game, and it's just the times to use that depth is the problem. I understand using different guys, like we just said, Gerald
Absolutely.
Holmes. I'm not a big Madre London guy. I know he had a 75-yard touchdown in the second quarter, but he's not
like his third huge spring game. So
right, he's not like a super speed back to offset the power.
Mm-hmm.
But Holmes, you've got guys, one really good running back and one, I think, good running back. So offensive line, huge question coming in. They seem very high on redshirt freshman Luke Campbell. They basically said they penciled him in as the right tackle already, which is a good sign if you're looking for offensive line fixes.
Yeah, I was. If it's funny, I wrote a post on it this week, just about how in a lot of different, there's so many, the offensive line is going to look so much different than it did to start last season. I mean, you're talking about, you will have 2 returning starters in Brian Allen and David Beadle in all likelihood, but you're talking about moving them from left tackle and left guard, where they're both playing out of position. Allen less so than Beadle, but you're getting them back to center in Allen's case and right guard in Beadle's case. And that alone is a massive upgrade over starting them on the other side.
Yeah.
You know, I think coming into this year, you're probably only looking at one real question spot. I think on the left side, Chewins and Tyler Higbee really solidified that line coming down the stretch. Now, it didn't result in wins per se, but you could just see better protection and better movement in the run game, and you saw it in the running stats. Brian Allen, I think, is just a better natural pivot in the middle than Cody Keeler, who had been moved over there from, right tackle.
Cody Keeler played everything.
Right, that one never sat all that well with me. I think that was more because they had guys who could only play other positions, whereas he could moonlight everywhere. But the biggest question mark was that right tackle spot where you had A.J. Arcuri, maybe Dennis Finley, who had that horrific leg injury a couple years ago, is apparently healthy. But Luke Campbell, as a redshirt freshman, the fact that he kind of already, like, in a Lewerke-ish way, has kind of claimed the starting spot already is, I'm personally, you can choose to take it one of 2 ways. You can say either, oh my God, no one else can beat out a redshirt freshman, or you can choose to look at it through the good spin zone, like I'm choosing to do, and say the fact that there is a quote unquote strong right tackle ready to go as a redshirt freshman is really exciting.
Yeah, I would go with the optimistic view, because
right,
when these coaches kind of hype up a guy, they're usually right.
Yeah, true. I mean, they've been on Chewins and Higbee for 2-3 years.
Well, I mean, they talked about Narduzzi used to talk about Shalik Calhoun a ton when he redshirted. They talked about Darquestin Nard a lot. So when these guys when they kind of publicly go out on a limb for a guy, they're usually right. One I think they haven't been right on, but it's a lot of factors, is Vante Copeland. But he's kind of had a ton of injuries and kind of a lot going on, so it's hard to. That one hasn't really, I guess.
We'll see. That's still TBD at this point.
Like the others, but generally, I mean, especially for the offensive line, the fact that they're ready to put a redshirt freshman there and say that means they really like what he's got. So that's. I mean, I think it's a positive.
You could be talking about, and again, this is optimistic, but really not that big of a stretch. If you just look at the base, you look at them side to side, you could be talking about an improvement at every position on the offensive line coming into 2017. And when again, it sounds like this crazy grandiose statement, but think about the fact that last year they were 3-9 and the offensive line was abysmal, like terrible, and was really the root at the end of the day, was the main root of the offensive problems. An improvement at all 5 positions isn't exactly this outrageous statement, but also, I mean, think about how many wins, if you're just able to run the ball somewhat effectively, that offensive line is going to get you going into 2017. I know it's not, it's apples to oranges because the schedule is different, it's different teams, but theoretically, if that offensive line is a little more up to par and the quarterback play is another step forward, you're talking about a 2-3 win difference based on that alone. Forget the defensive side of the ball. You're talking, that's just, to me, I don't think you can undersell. And there's plenty of areas where this team can improve. You can't undersell how important the offensive line is to this team's moving forward.
The offensive line is I think as important as anything when you look at the good years and the bad years for MSU.
Mm-hmm.
When they're down, the offensive line is atrocious. They've never had a great line, but they've had, in the years that they were good, they had an above-average line.
Yeah. I mean, you had guys like Conklin and Allen.
Right. And you had guys, right, Conklin go to the NFL.
Donovan Clark
go to the NFL. Jack Allen is an all-Big Ten guy.
Blake Treadwell was solid.
There were some other guys in the years prior I'm blanking on, but right. So it just needs to be above average. They don't bring in the 5-star lineman recruits like an Ohio
Mhm.
State and Michigan do, and they never have and they never will. So you just gotta. You just can't have your line kill you, because
Yeah.
if the line blows, everything else is affected. You can't do anything about it.
You know
So-
what's really exciting too? Sorry to interrupt you, but
No.
the fact that the left tackle, right tackle, and left guard are redshirt sophomore, and redshirt freshman is really, really exciting, because the worst part of the line play last year was the tackle play. Beadle was completely overmatched as a left tackle.
Yeah, that was not
Miguel Machado was really, really bad. But Schuens looked, I mean, he's 6'8". He's up to 280 now based on the new roster. And you got a whole summer to pack on weight with Ken Manny. Like, that's exciting. And then if Campbell is even close to as good as they're saying he is, just that tackle play improvement alone, and at long term, you're talking about the next 2-3 years with these two guys. You could be looking at some real stability there for the first time in quite a while.
Yeah, and
it feels like quite a while. I guess it's really not that long ago that Jack Conklin was in town, but
the depth probably isn't great right now. But based on what they were last year, you're just looking for a solid starting five first.
Yeah, 100%. I think you have a decent amount of you have a couple what they've said are functional guys if Finley and Arcuri are up to it. But you're absolutely right. I think it's probably not. It's not elite by any stretch.
Yeah. So defensively, speaking of players who get a lot of praise or at least have a really good game, Josiah Scott, the early enrollee corner, had 8 tackles and a pick, and D'Antonio said he has a lot of dark Weston art in him after the game. What do you know?
No pressure, kid.
What do you know? What are your thoughts? What do you know about him?
Well, I was kind of surprised when he decided to enroll early. I mean, he's from Ohio. He was only like a 3-star kid. Again, not that the stars always mean anything. I feel like if a Michigan State coach identifies a DB and thinks he can be good, I'm going to side with him until proven otherwise, based on some of the guys they've landed. But I was surprised to see him enroll early from the get-go. But that's certainly a pleasant surprise. He's not an overly big corner. I think he's only 5'10", 5'11". I don't really think he's this big, the big type of guy they like to bring in. But it seems to me that he's just kind of a bulldog. And that's the type of DB that, especially a corner, that D'Antonio loves to have. If you look at the guys who kind of played a lot last year, Darian Hicks was never really that bulldog type. He was, just a little smaller, kind of got pushed around out there. Copeland's more of the style that D'Antonio likes. And if you look at the recruiting class from last year, a lot of those DBs he brought in are big, tall, lanky, will get up in your grill type of guys too. But yet to see him be productive and confident, I mean, build his confidence up. Listen, there's a lot of corners on this team, but none of them have done anything to separate themselves from the pack outside of maybe Justin Lane. So if he comes in and has a strong summer and a strong fall, no reason Josiah Scott can't find himself a really nice role on this team.
Yeah, they seem to be in a cautiously optimistic spot with the defensive backs, which was a huge problem the last 2 years.
Massive problem.
If Scott can be a serviceable guy, if Vante Copeland can get back to what he was, Matt Morris, Andrew Dowell's got potential. Matt Morrissey.
And you got Tyson Smith, Josh Butler.
Yeah, some guys who have shown flashes, but were put into situations as young guys last year. I think if these guys can develop, like I said, cautiously optimistic. I'm not gonna do what Dom did and say it's like the new no-fly zone.
Oh God, yeah. That guy.
He was optimistic. He was optimistic. It didn't work out, but he was optimistic. There is, I guess it's kind of, you knew that Monte Nicholson, Darian Hicks, Demetrius Cox, you knew what they were, and what they were was not nearly good enough. Now you've got some new guys. There's a chance they could be good enough.
Yeah.
And that's what you're looking at this point.
I'll say that the corners, I think, are almost like the offensive line in a way in that there's so much competition that if they can just kind of step up, the attrition's not going to matter all that much. I mean, as long as one or two, I mean, Justin Lane appears to be the real deal. He played really well as a freshman. He's a star. You can put him in there at Penn as a starter. And then you look at that next group of Copeland, Tyson. I mean, Tyson Smith started and looked really nice a couple times last year, but he also had his bad moments. Josh Butler.
Was he the one who committed the non-pass interference on the Illinois game? Or I think they had 2 pass interferences in a row for that.
I think he was at least one of those.
I don't know if he was I don't remember if he was the one who did commit it or the one who did.
I do remember him being a part of that. He's looked good in his time. Josh Butler. You're talking about David Dowell has flashed. He had a big spring game last year. Josiah Scott. But that group is all muddled. Like, if 2 of those guys, if one can be a starter caliber and one can just be decent depth, you should be okay at corner. What scares me personally is the safety. The safeties are the backbone of that quarter's defense. They got to be rangy. They got to be good tacklers, and they got to communicate. And you're probably looking at Grayson Miller and Kari Willis.
The guys who started as true freshmen at Michigan,
right?
Back in 2015.
I think against decent offenses, that's going to be okay. They're going to be able to do it, but those are not your top-notch athletes. Those are not your R.J. Williamsons. Those are not your Isaiah Lewises or your Curtis Drummonds or anything like that. So. That's going to be a concern against vertical passing offenses and kind of those offenses like the Ohio States and the Penn States that take those big shots down the field. So that'll be interesting. I think at corner they'll be all right. Safety scares me a little more. Do you want to get into the front 7 at all?
Yeah, I haven't. I didn't pay much attention to the D line during what I watched of the spring game, but just knowing of the guy, I know I saw Raekwon Williams, he obviously had a good freshman year, and it's probably the guy I think a lot of people have said about coming in. What else?
I think they've got a chance to be. I think just by, again, maybe the better correlation is corners and D line as opposed to offensive line and corner, but there's
it's hard to be worse. You can't be worse.
I think that's probably where we should start. They literally can only get like one position worse when it comes to a pass rush. They had 11 sacks last year.
I'm surprised is that it was like 5 going into the Ohio State. They got 3 in the first half against Ohio State. That was like equal to what they had all year up to that point.
It was a shocking and just, I mean, really the word is unacceptable. It's an unacceptable performance.
It did come after losing 7 defensive linemen from
absolutely.
They were gutted at that position by graduation transfer or whatever. So it was a lot of guys in positions they weren't in before, and a year later it looks better.
But it's going to look a lot better this year. We said it a lot at the end of last year that just the simple experience for a lot of these young guys is going to make a big difference down the line. I think Raekwon Williams, up the middle, you should be in good shape. Raekwon Williams, Mike Panasiuk both looked real good when they were healthy last year. Mm-hmm. Especially Panasiuk down the stretch looked like he's a big boy. He's physically ready.
They were freshmen. Yeah, I mean, Panasiuk's 6'3", 312.
He's a big fella.
They were, and was he a wrestler?
He was, yeah.
Okay, yeah, and they were freshmen last year.
Yeah, and you're talking about a tandem of sophomores, and then people almost forget about Naquan Jones, who was a 4-star defensive tackle recruit in last year's class, who he only redshirted because he was injured. He had like a nagging, I think it was an ankle, that kind of lasted the whole season, or kind of got deep enough into the year where they didn't want to pull his shirt because he was already, why burn that at that point when you're already 3-8 or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I guess he flashed pretty well in the game. Between those 3, you're talking about a decent little rotation up front. I think at defensive end, just simply not having Evan Jones in there and replacing him with, Demetrius Cooper, Robert Bowers.
Demetrius Cooper's a guy who came in with a lot of Shirley Calhoun comparisons.
No, we'll see. This is his chance.
We haven't seen it so far.
Yeah, Robert Bowers played pretty well down the stretch last year. And you know who else keeps flashing? The name I keep seeing is Kenny Willekes. this sophomore walk-on, he had 8 tackles and a tackle and a half for loss in this game, and I think he played pretty well down the stretch last year.
There was the one game I'm looking up right now. There was one game he had he's not. They don't have his stats on here from last year. There was one game where I don't know if it was the Rutgers or something, but he really stuck out.
I think there are some other guys. Austin Robertson, I think you're probably looking at him starting on the defense. Well, if not starting, he'll rotate in a lot on the defensive line behind Bowers and oh my gosh, Cooper. I think again, it's just it's comical, but like if your defensive line is literally average,
there's so many spots. There's so many
average
on both lines. If you can just get to replacement level,
that's it.
Like that's a pretty big improvement.
You get to replacement level at the positions that were so horrendous last year, and you're looking at 7 or 8 wins off of that, assuming that none of the other positions improve. I really genuinely believe that that's 4 to 5 wins right there.
Well, let's
4, but
I was gonna get at the end. I was gonna get your brief, way too early record prediction.
Okay,
after
we can get there at the end.
Yeah, after we finish this. What do you think of linebackers?
Well, linebackers got gutted. This offseason was not good for attrition-wise for the backers. Riley Bulla, who revealed that he was playing with a broken shoulder blade all season. That's pretty cool. He was in and out last year, but obviously losing a player like that is never ideal. Reschke is gone for other reasons. He
was going to be your best guy coming back.
Oh, he was going to be absolutely maybe your best player, one of your best players on the whole defense, but gone for, he made mistakes you can't make. He did things you can't do to be on a football team. So he's gone for different reasons. There's a lot of talent. Again, it's funny. I find myself saying the same thing at every position, but there's a ton of talent here.
I mean, Shane Jones is kind of like a Demetrius Cooper, a guy who I think people came in and a lot of hype on. Now he's a senior, and you haven't really seen it.
I'm not sure whether he'll probably start. I would give him the inside track to start at the mic, assuming they don't move Chris Fry into the middle and they keep him outside. But you're probably looking at Dowell and Fry as your outside linebackers. I think that's a pretty damn good place to start, personally. I think it's Dowell, with the way offenses play, you usually need a nickelback in there. They seem to like him in that role, and at least the
somewhat
in
coverage. Yeah, I mean, they seem to think he can cover well enough in that spot. So.
Yeah, he's just an athlete. I think what he needs to do more is just get his nose dirty up against the run. That was his toughest spot. But he had that one interception against Furman at the beginning of the year with the one hand. He's got star potential to me, but it's just a matter of harnessing it. Fry, I think, like you said, Shane Jones in the middle will be solid, if not spectacular.
They're pretty small at linebacker too.
They are,
and that's where it comes in. What you have at defensive tackle, and if you can be good in the middle, you can kind of make up for the.
Right, and I think
small linebackers.
I think the linebackers were kind of picked apart just like every other position, but they had no help from that defensive line. So I think the improvement there will work its way all the way back through the defense. And there are some young guys that are going to push. I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Bocci is starting at some point this year. They really liked him enough to pull his redshirt last year.
He'll be a sophomore.
Yeah. Who are some of the other kids? Oh, they still have Tyreek Thompson. I mean, he came in with a ton of potential.
He's only a sophomore. I think he read.
Yeah. I think he redshirted.
No. He would. Let me see here. See if he's a redshirt.
He is.
Yeah. He redshirted in 2015, so he's a redshirt sophomore.
Yeah, I think I've read that he's kind of in that same Shane Jones mold where he might be a step slow to really play on the outside, but I think he's a good depth linebacker. If he loses a little more weight, I think he could be a really good player. He might even moonlight at defensive end from what I've read. He's a pretty good pass rusher, I guess. I think the play of the linebacker, the talent's all there. It's just a matter of, I think if the defensive line could do them do a couple more favors than they did the line last year, in terms of keeping some of those blockers from getting to the second level and maybe letting their guys make plays, pace. That'll go a long way. But you're right, size is definitely a bit of a concern. None of those good dudes are very. They're not many thumpers in there just yet. There's another Bulla too. Byron Bulla is still in there. He did a lot last year, and he looks just like Riley on the field. I couldn't even tell him apart last year. So there's plenty of bodies. I don't think they'll lack for depth. It's just a matter of whether the starters can be a step above.
Yeah, and who knows if I don't remember who's in the recruiting class, but
Antoine Simmons is their big.
He may get a shot in there. So yeah, it's kind of where they are with offense, defense. It's all we got to really see and hear because there wasn't any stories throughout spring of who's shining and who's not. We kind of just got to see what we saw on Saturday, and it was good and bad, I think. But you'd like to think there's nowhere to go but up in some spots.
You hope so.
Coming off a 3-9 season, so that takes me into the next deal. Your early thoughts on a record prediction. The schedule goes: Bowling Green at home, Western Michigan at home, bye. Notre Dame at home, Iowa at home, at Michigan, at Minnesota, Indiana, at Northwestern, Penn State, at Ohio State, Maryland, at Rutgers. It's 5 Big Ten road games because they had 5 Big Ten home games last year with the new 9-game schedule. They like I said, start off with four home games. They don't leave Spartan Stadium until October, and they don't leave the state of Michigan until midway through October. And they do again have an early bye, but it's not week 1 this time. It's week 2. It's going into an important stretch of Notre Dame, Iowa, Michigan. We don't need to get into a whole schedule breakdown because I haven't looked at other teams. We don't know who's going to be. But your first thoughts on a record? I go 6-6.
Yeah, I'm going to be optimistic and say anywhere
14-0.
No, I'm not. You remember this is Austin, not Tom. I'm going to say anywhere from 7 to 8 wins. I kind of think they'll land in there. The schedule, the first half, I don't know. I don't see any teams on here outside of Ohio State and Michigan. I mean, those are going to be 2 really good teams, even though Michigan lost.
Michigan's going to be weird.
I will say
they got like 3 returning starters.
I will say that I think this year is a really good year to catch Michigan early because they're the 5th game of the season. It's in the Big House, but at the same time, I don't think that game ever really matters where it's being played, frankly. But, this is a good year to catch them early because they might not have come around. Whereas if you catch them late in the season and all those starters are no longer really new starters anymore, there's a lot of talent on that team. But catching them early is a good thing. I think catching Notre Dame early is a good thing because they've got to replace a bunch of players, including a quarterback. I know they've got some Brandon Wimbushes there. They've got some talented kids. But I think 7 to 8 wins is pretty fair. I don't see a lot of surefire losses on here. I don't see – I mean, again, on the flip side of that, I don't see a ton of surefire wins. I think a lot of these teams are undergoing kind of a lot of changes as well. So, it's hard to say at this point. But
a 3-9 MSU team was a 2-point conversion away from possibly beating Ohio State, and they played Michigan tough, and then they also lost to Indiana and Maryland and these teams that they should. We went into last year. We all gave them the benefit of the doubt,
right?
And said D'Antoni deserves the benefit of the doubt. Now I'm the other side. Now I need to see it to believe it.
Yeah,
because of the way they lost those games last year. There was no leadership. There was no chemistry. There was all the intangibles that had defined this program for half a decade were gone. And Reschke gets kicked off, leaves the team under bad circumstances. You have the sexual assault thing going on. I'm going to question the leadership and chemistry and intangibles of this team until I see otherwise. I think they lose one of the Notre Dame Iowa games. I think they lose one of those. I think they lose at Michigan. I think they lose at home to Penn State. I think they lose at Ohio State. That's 4 losses right there. They probably lose at least one of the other road games between Minnesota, Rutgers, and Northwestern, maybe 2. Indiana should probably be better. The MSU gets them at home. And so we'll see where they're at, but where last year they started off with the easy games and had to try to rally late. This year they start off more with the hard ones, with the Notre Dame, Iowa, Michigan early, and then finishing up with Maryland, Rutgers. I mean, Penn State, Ohio State in early November is going to be extremely difficult. I'm going to pencil in losses for both of those, but it's not. Last year's schedule was very front loaded. This one's a little bit more balanced.
I don't really hate that. Honestly,
it helps. It helps. I think it helps with a young team that you get an early bye. I think it helps with a young team that you start off with your first 4 games at home.
Mm-hmm.
But last year's schedule, you did have Michigan at home. You had Ohio State at home. It's kind of set up for a. I think having 5 Big Ten road games will be tough. So I think 6-6 because I gotta.
That's fair.
I gotta see it before I believe it because
I will say
they lost. Other than Rutgers, I mean, they lost to almost all these teams last year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the skepticism is deserved and fair. It's hard to be overly optimistic about a team that just went 3-9 in fairly embarrassing fashion. But I'll say a couple things. One is that they're going to use all of this hardship that they've gone through, maybe not hardship might be the wrong word, but all of these different things that have gone on as motivation. I mean, listen, it's so played out. It's so played out. But the chip on the shoulder thing, nobody believes in us. That's D'Antonio's spot, man. That's his rallying cry. That's what they've always used. And I think that this group of young guys are going to not want to be associated with the past failures, and B, the stigma that's kind of developed over the program to this point. So I think that could help with a little bit of motivation. And I also don't hate that the schedule's front loaded. I mean, yes, the team theoretically is going to be, not as seasoned. Understandably, that's a huge concern, but it's like these guys got to get locked in. They don't have the luxury of waiting 5 games before they have to play their tough opponent and their first tough opponent. You only got 3 weeks, and then you're playing Notre Dame at home. Like, you got to be locked in. I don't think motivation. I don't think concentration or lack of. I mean, leadership is a whole different thing. But I feel like they have to be locked in from game 1 this year, as opposed to starting with Furman. And I mean, I know they played Notre Dame game 2, but I don't know. I don't know. I guess I'm a hopeless optimist, but
we got to see what happens with the sexual assault investigation. I mean,
absolutely.
Part of the. I mean, a big part of the chip on their shoulder is, I mean, it's their own doing. It's not it's not like they're coming off a 10-win season and people are picking them to lose and they got to prove them wrong. It's, you guys done messed up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have it? And do you have a Kirk Cousins on this team who's going to rally the team and guide it in the right direction, as he did in 2009 when things were going bad, and as he did after that heading into 2010 as a senior captain? I don't know who that guy is. This team did not have that guy last year. It did have several of those guys the year prior with non-captain Connor Cook, Shalik Calhoun, Darian Harris, Jack Allen, and those guys. There were guys that said, everybody, this is where we're going. Right. I don't know if this team has that. Plus, it's a really young team. I think that's going to be incredibly important, not only because of regular football stuff and coming off a 3-9 season, but however this sexual assault investigation turns out, either guys kicked off the team and it's a bad thing around the program, and someone has to kind of guide everybody down the right path again, or nothing happens and there's questions, or either way, someone has to take it down the right path, because it's not going. It's well off track right now. And Antonio said something about team morale is as high as it's ever been. Don't give me that. Okay.
Yeah, I don't buy that for a second. I think in a way, I guess what I was trying to say is that the guys that are left over, if in fact this turns out to be, the sexual assault investigation ends up in guys getting kicked out. This is a very different looking team than a year ago. A lot of those negative guys, a lot of what you've heard, quote unquote, locker room cancers are no longer there. Obviously, you know what I mean? Like there's been a big purge, a huge amount of turnover in one season. And so you got to think that, again, it's going to take that one leader in that clubhouse. But if you have that one guy who can rally everybody together and be like, listen, we're here. We are this program. The guys that left are gone. The things that happened. We can't control that. We have to put our best foot forward and get back to being the Michigan State of old. If you got guys like that, that's a very strong rallying cry, in my opinion.
And not even on the field, and off the field too. Who's gonna,
who's gonna be the face of the program? Who's gonna speak to the media? Who's gonna represent the Spartans?
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. That's a key thing, because the guys who did last year, the guys who were voted captain last year clearly did not have the attention of everybody on the team, whether whoever's fault it was.
Yep.
So yeah, who's going to get things back on track on the field, back on track off the field, and because man, this program lost a lot of cachet after first off the 3-9 season, and then this off the field stuff.
Things have hit pretty close to rock bottom.
And it came quick, and coaching was not good either last year. The coaching leadership, I don't think, was good. There's a lot of intangible stuff that we just don't know about this team, and that this team absolutely will need to have.
A lot of question marks.
See what happens between now and the start of camp, and a lot could happen between now and then. So we'll see about that. Basketball stuff real quick. No update on Miles Bridges. But there's some recruiting stuff going on that I'm not totally familiar with, so I will let you take it away.
Sure. Like you said, no update on Bridges, which is really what everything's sort of waiting on. Michigan State, I mean, they could have anywhere from 2 to 3 scholarships. They could need to replace a superstar. It's all sort of up in the air until then, but they have been doing their due diligence. Obviously, everybody's familiar with the McDonald's All-Americans, Brian Bowen and Brandon McCoy. Bowen, obviously, Jaren Jackson, current commit. It's his teammate from La Lumiere, now the national champions, down there in Indianapolis. Obviously, Jackson's been recruiting him probably all season. Jackson also got the chance to room with Brandon McCoy in Chicago for the All-American week, and was pretty open about recruiting him as well. So a lot of people seem to think it's Arizona for Bowen, but I'm not really convinced that anybody knows. McCoy, there's a lot of smoke around Oregon, which would make a lot of sense. But again, I don't really know what to expect from either of these guys until there's pen to paper. It's possible one comes, possible it'd be pretty incredible if both did. I don't know that that's going to happen, but it's very possible that neither do. And obviously the Michigan State coaches understand and agree with that, because they've been, working that recruiting trail ever since the season ended. 2 recruits in particular have really popped up, and it's obvious that Michigan State, Izzo is concentrating on, if those other 2 All-Americans fall through, where does his roster sit? What positions does he need to address? And I think the biggest one is kind of like a combo guard. And if you look at the 2 guys he's recruited, Blake Harris from Word of God Academy, I think in Virginia or South Carolina, I can't remember which, or maybe it's North Carolina. Either way. So he's a 6'3" point guard. I saw a picture of him next to Markelle Fultz, and he's the same height as him. So one of them is listed incorrectly. But he's, I guess, a little more of a point guard, but, another creator, another ball handler going into next year when really you've only got Cassius and Tum Tum would be a nice addition. The one that there's the most interest in and the most immediate what's going to happen the soonest is Mark Smith. He was Illinois' Mr. Basketball. He's a top 75 to 80 recruit, like a 6'4", kind of a combo guard. He's going to be in East Lansing this weekend on his, I don't know if it's an official visit or if it's an unofficial, but he's supposed to be up there all weekend. Actually, I think it is an official. There's a lot of smoke around him in Illinois, but after Gross got fired, that all kind of fell apart. And now Illinois has lost their best recruit, Jeremiah Tillman, who's a top 30 kid. And there's some smoke around him going to Mizzou to join up with Michael Porter. And it's possible Mark Smith could go there as well. But obviously he's very interested in Michigan State and vice versa. The entire coaching staff was down to see him about 2 weeks ago. They offered him. and he's already got a visit set up, a week and a half later. So obviously there's some mutual interest. It'll be interesting to see if he wants to commit, if they accept his commitment, because it'll speak volumes as to what they think of the other two kids. They're after a couple grad transfers as well. They checked in on Enes Kanter's younger brother today. I'm not inclined to think much is going to happen there. But it'll be interesting to see who else they reach out to on the grad transfer market, because again, if they whiff on, McCoy and Bowen, it's very possible that they have a scholarship to hand out to to whoever wants to come suit up. So, and somebody who's looking for minutes, because there are backcourt minutes to be had on this team. It's just a matter of who they're going to be playing with. So a lot of it hinges on Miles Bridges. I think regardless of what happens, this team is still probably in really good shape in the conference next year. But a lot of stuff. It could get very interesting very quickly after this weekend and Mark Smith's visit.
And lastly, for this podcast, what was your favorite moment from WrestleMania?
Yeah, I don't know, man. Twitter.
Too many awesome moments. So you can't just.
I'm not nearly the wrestling guy. I'm not a wrestling guy at all. I do enjoy being on Twitter during big wrestling occasions, though, because I have no idea what's going on. It's like when soccer's happening. I have no clue what's up, but everyone's having a great time. So I'm along for the ride. But yeah, it was crazy.
I actually thought I was going to lose a bunch of followers because the year prior I had lost like 20 or so. But as I did a year ago, before the show, I said, WrestleMania's tonight. You may want to mute the hashtag WrestleMania, because I tried to include that so people could mute the hashtag. So when something comments, or you could just mute me. I didn't, and I said that last year and I still lost 20 followers. I did that. I did it this year. I didn't lose anybody. I actually gained a couple followers. So Thanks, everybody, and I hope you like my wrestling tweets.
Wow. Yeah, I think clearly you've got an audience.
But I thought the best moment was the return of the Hardy Boys, not the detectives.
Okay.
So yeah. All right. I'm not sure when we'll do the next podcast. There could be some news making things happening. We may decide to just take reader, listener questions off of Twitter and just roll with it. I'm at Chris Vanini. He's at AC Smith 6 still. Make sure you're still checking out theonlycolors.com for a bunch of good stuff. We have nothing on hockey. We didn't really talk about this. I guess we didn't really talk about this before, but the hockey job is open after several years under Tom Monastis that clearly did not work out. I wasn't sure if they'd make a change, but after MSU's worst season in like 40 years, they decided to make a change. There's not a huge update on who the next coach is, but presumably he will actually have coaching experience this time, so that will be a step up from Tom Monastis, who came into the job from CCHA commissioner. And he did rebuild MSU's recruiting pipelines that had been destroyed under Rick Comley, but player development was a problem. There were a whole bunch of problems with the team, obviously. So that search is going on. Don't really know where that's going. Northern Michigan's got its own search going on, and Michigan doesn't yet. Red Barrington, it sounds like, may return again after Michigan's worst year in forever. As MSU was awful this past year, and they still beat Michigan twice. That tells you what Michigan was. It was a terrible year for both squads, but the longer Michigan doesn't make a decision, the more it should help MSU in terms of the pecking order of jobs. So we'll see where that goes. I know Jeremy Dewar, the hockey writer here, is big on Danton Cole, who's the national development team coach, and would bring a lot of he's an MSU alum. He brings familiarity and a coaching pedigree and a recruiting pedigree. I think that's who Jeremy would want, but we'll see where that goes in a little bit. So till next time, everybody. Was there anything else you want to hit?
No, that's about it. Hit me up on Twitter. I'm always available to chat about anything you guys want to talk about. And that's
Same
about
here.
it.
Same here. All right. Thanks, guys, for listening, and we will talk to you whenever. See ya.